Today's sermon is titled, Devoted to God's Leadership. God's plan for leadership. So if I stand up here and I say, okay, guys, who is our leader? What does our leadership look like? Most of you probably would say, oh, Pastor Mike, he is our leader. He is our shepherd. He is our pastor. He is the one that we look to. He is our leader. Now, there is obviously some sense that, yes, I am one of your leaders. I am a leader here. But one of the things that we have done, especially in American Christianity, as we have kind of hijacked what the pastoral role is supposed to be. We have said, you know what, the pastor is the one who is the professional. He is the one that we look to for all of our needs. So if there is a sermon that needs to be preached, it better be Pastor Mike. And Pastor Mike, when you preach, you better preach a soul-stirring, crying, emotional sermon every single Sunday that meets my needs. If there's teaching that goes on, whether it's an introduction to Gateway or a theology class, Pastor Mike's doing it. If y'all are sitting out here struggling in your marriages or your kids have gone buck wild crazy, it's Pastor Mike you better run to, because he, after all, he's the one we pay. He's the professional. He's the one that went to seminary and got his degree. If there's somebody in here who is sick and in the hospital, it's Pastor Mike that is going to go and visit in the hospital. If there is marital issues, if there are kid issues, if there are any issues, anything at all that is going on in our lives, it is Pastor Mike who is going to do everything. If there's weddings, it's Pastor Mike doing the premarital and everything. If there's funerals, it's Pastor Mike who is going to be over the gravesite. If there are births, it's Pastor Mike who's going to be at the hospital for the babies. If there are baptisms, it's Pastor Mike. Even though Pastor Mike might not have been the one who discipled the person, it's still Pastor Mike who's going to do all the work. Now, don't hear me saying that Pastor Mike should not be doing these things, because I should be. But here's what I want to contend. Again, we have hijacked what a pastor is. At the heart of who a pastor is, a lead pastor, is a shepherd, a person to know the sheep. Ray and I were talking about this last week I think it was, and talking about how biblically we should smell like sheep at the end of the day, meaning that we should be spending a lot of time with you guys. We should be there with your hurts and your pains. But what we've done is professionalized the ministry. This is not the heart of God for leadership in God's church. It's not all about me. It's not all about my gifts or my experience or my seminary or my this or my that. All of us ultimately are the ones who are called to be leaders in this church. But again, American Christianity, not biblical Christianity, says this, that y'all are spectators. You sit back and you watch us perform. Think of it in football terms. The expectation is you don't play football, you're not the quarterback, you don't even get to coach, you don't pick up the trash, you don't come to the stadium, you don't bring food, you don't bring Gatorade. What we're expected to do as American Christians is sit in the stands and cheer on everybody else as they perform. And this is not Christian leadership the way God has designed it to be. It is not. And because of this, many of my brothers and many of my friends, and beyond even to people I know, they're falling from the ministry. They're falling, they're leaving, they're going to be accountants, they're going to be doctors, they're going to be teachers, they're going to do everything else. They're leaving the ministry left and right. And it's not because they don't love the Lord, it's not because they don't love His church, it's not because they don't have a calling on their life, it's not because they're not gifted to do it. They're doing it because we have put such unhealthy burdens on the role of a pastor. Unhealthy expectations that he is the do-it-all for us. I want to share some stats with you that pertain to this idea of how we are burning out our pastors and how they are dropping left and right because of American unhealthy, unrealistic expectations. And I want to be real with you as I go through these. As I read off each one, I want to tell you if this is something I struggle with or not. So the first one is 38% of pastors contemplate leaving the ministry, 51% during COVID time. The reason it was higher during COVID time is because pastors couldn't do anything right. If we close down the church because we want our people to be safe and see what's going on with this pandemic, people were mad and they left. If we opened up the church and said faith over fear, which I hate that saying, I'm wisdom over stupidity more than faith over fear. If we did that, then other people left the church because, hey, he doesn't love our people. They're going to get sick. They're going to die. What's wrong with them? And so there's great amount of stress was put on the shoulders of the pastors during this time. That's why half of the pastors during this season contemplated leaving ministry. This is not something I've ever done. I would not fit into the 38% here. There's certainly been seasons of my life where I thought, man, a cabin in the woods by a lake, away from everybody, sounds awesome. But there's never been a moment I said, God, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it anymore. 75% of pastors report being extremely stressed or highly stressed. Yeah, 100%. I'm in that. I mean, there's seasons. There's ebbs and flows. Seems like there's more seasons of stress than not, and a lot of you could relate to this in other jobs, not just the job of being a pastor. 90% of pastors work between 55 and 75 hours of work. 100% sit into that. I mean, it's hard. I have a hard time shutting down. I try really hard to value Tuesdays as my Queen's Day, and I want to thank you guys because so many of you have acknowledged that, and y'all leave me alone on Tuesday. It's pretty awesome. Obviously, if there's emergencies, hit me, call me. But I try to do that. Saturday I try to have with the family, but that doesn't happen that often, and I feel terrible because I'm so overwhelmed with stress and work. Even yesterday, we had plans to go to the beach, and we ended up not going because of just a lot of work I had to do, and I found about an hour yesterday to decompress. We went out into the woods, Indian Hammocks Park, which I don't know if any of you ever heard of me say, the one thing I missed about Miami from up north is the woods. And this place I call it's called Lum's Pond, where I would walk and hike. What I have discovered quickly is Indian Hammock can be that for me. So it's a place where I could decompress, and I was feeling so stressed and so burdened yesterday that I said, Tina, let's just get out in the woods for a little bit. And for an hour, I was feeling good, and then literally as soon as I sat back in the Suburban, the stress returns. And I was like, all right, Tina, time to get home. Let's get back to work. 90% feel fatigued or worn out every week. I mean, I wouldn't say that's for me every week, but it's definitely exhausting. Sundays, I crash. Like, I crash and fall, and man, it is the most exhausting thing to get through a week of ministry and then to stand up here and preach and then get home. And man, 2 weeks ago, Adam and Alana wanted to go out to lunch, and I was like, nah, I can't do it. I'm just too tired. I'm too weak. Can't happen. I've used this illustration before. What ministry is like for a pastor is walking into an office on Monday morning with this big rock at the bottom of this massive hill. And every day of the week, you're pushing this rock up to the top of the hill. And then on Sunday, what happens, you get that rock to the top of the hill, and it rolls down the hill to the bottom of the hill, and you can take a deep breath and sit back in your recliner and breathe. And then Monday morning, you walk right back into your office with that big rock at the bottom of the hill, and you got to do it all over again. 70% feel they're grossly underpaid. I don't feel that way. Y'all are very generous to me and my family. Thank you for loving us and taking care of us well. 40% report a serious conflict with a parishioner at least once a month. I would say maybe once a quarter, if that, at Gateway. I found by God's grace, people who maybe disagree with us or me or the vision or where we're going as a church, instead of bringing conflict, they kind of just left, and that's all part of God's doing. That's okay. 78% were forced to resign from the church. That's never happened in Gateway. Let's make a covenant today that never happens. All right, you want to? 80% will not be in ministry 10 years later, and only a fraction make it a lifelong career. Only 20% of pastors make it into 10 years of ministry. And it's interesting because there was a little sub-stat there that said, guys who went through seminary only make it to about 5 years. And the reason for that is guys who go through seminary don't know the realness of ministry. They know books, they know theology, they know doctrine, but they don't know the day-to-day grind. And that's why here when we have our pastoral intern program, our heart, and I talk with Ray about this a lot as our pastoral intern, we just literally talked about this week, the expectation is hands-on, real ministry to prepare him to be a pastor, shepherd in the church, not to be surprised by the sheep that have very, very sharp teeth at times. And then 91% have experienced some form of burnout. Yes, this has definitely happened for me. There's been few seasons in my life that I can remember where I was just burnt out. There was no joy in ministry, no hope for the future, just exhausted. But one of the things I have learned to do is really balance my life and balance my schedule. The older I get, the longer I've been in ministry. I've actually, preaching through this, realized I've made it past the 10-year mark, and by God's grace, we'll continue. But I've learned that I need breaks. I can't just do the grind every week, the same thing, or I will be burnt out, and I'm going to be no good to any of you. And so I already talked about how I try to take Tuesdays or Saturdays off. I try to schedule sermons so that I could get even breaks from preaching, because there's so much work that goes into preparing a sermon. A lot of people think like, man, you're a pastor, it's the greatest job in the world, you just got to talk for 45 minutes. But you realize how much study and prep and war and toil goes into writing a sermon. It's brutal. And so even next month, we're doing a sermon series titled Our Favorite Passages. All of June, we're going to have me, or I'm going to preach the first week in July, but Danny and Adam and Joe, our pastors, are going to preach, and even Jesse Carbo, our treasurer, who's a pastor, they're going to preach a sermon. The whole point of that is I have now preached 15 out of 16 Sundays, and I need to take a step back. And I need to be able to focus on other things we're doing in the church as well. So that month of June is going to give me that opportunity. And honestly, I think I'm going to build this into my schedule every year. We're going to be here, except for one Sunday. We're actually going to go up north to see my mom and mother-in-law and brother and sister and brother-in-law and stuff like that. But we're going to be here. It's just now the Lord's going to say, hey, you could focus on other things, projects we've been working on in the church that we're trying to get accomplished. So I'm building in breaks. And even when we get to late summer, we're going to preach through the book of 1 John. It's going to be a sermon series titled To John, the letter to John. And even in that, there's going to be 6 weeks. And then on the 7th week, I'm going to take a break. And then when we get into the fall, we're going to preach through a book I've always wanted to preach through as long as I've been a pastor, is the book of Ecclesiastes. And even in that, if you look, 6 weeks and then a break, 6 weeks and then a break. So I've learned how to not kill myself and to completely burn myself out. See, the way we view the role of the pastor and his responsibilities is not biblical. It's just not. Yes, I have my responsibilities. Not all of y'all are going to stand up here on Sunday mornings. I get that. But to put all the weight on one man in the church is not healthy. It's not Old Testament theology. It's not even New Testament theology. The expectation for every single soul, living soul in this room, is that we all step up and we lead in God's church. Now, I want to give you a quick case study before we jump into Nehemiah. If you want to open your Bibles to the book of Exodus, it's the second book in the Bible, chapter 18. And what we see in this passage is, man, God bringing his people out of Egypt, loving them, taking care of them, feeding them, giving them water from rocks. And we see a guy named Moses. A lot of us has heard of him, and he's just an awesome guy. He's a godly guy. He's a leader, and we see him worshiping with his father-in-law, Jethro, and having a great time and sacrificing to the Lord. But then we get this glimpse into the life of Moses through the lens of Jethro. It's like a modern-day vlog, a day in the life of a pastor. Remember I talked about this a couple weeks ago? I was watching some of these on YouTube. This is a day in the life of Pastor Moses. Here's what it says in verse 13. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. So the first thing we learn about the heart of Moses is that he was a yes man. He couldn't say no to anybody. Everybody and anybody in Israel is coming to Moses. He's sitting there. He's listening to people complain about their dogs, to people complaining about their mother-in-laws, to people complaining about the church, to the bad sermons, to the bad worship, to everything. He's listening to every detail of what's going on. And then it says when Moses' father-in-law saw that was what was going on, what he was doing for the people, he said, "What is it that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses' father-in-law says, "You're not going to succeed, Moses. What are you doing? You're doing this all day, every day? Moses, you are going to be one of the stats. You're not going to make it 5 years in ministry, Moses. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep carrying all the burdens of everybody's needs." And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me and inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them known the statutes of God and his law." So Moses' response is, I'm the pastor, I'm the shepherd, I'm the leader, I'm Moses. People are needy. People have needs, Dad. I need to help them. Like, I can't turn anybody away. And again, this is something I struggle with. Like, I could be all big and bold up here and be like, oh, when it's family time, it's family time. But guess what happens if you text me at 8:30 at night when I'm watching a movie with Tina? I respond. I respond because I'm a yes man. And it's a weakness of mine. And I don't want to hurt any of y'all. And this is what Moses is doing. Everybody he's responding to. Verse 17, so Moses, the father-in-law, said to him, "What you are doing, Moses, is not good. Moses, you need to shut your phone down. Moses, you need to honor your Queen's Day. Moses, you need to have your family days. Moses, you don't need to respond to everybody in every situation. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. So sometimes we've got to slow down and listen to godly wisdom in our lives. If we have people in our lives who are seasoned Christians and they have wisdom over certain situations, let's listen and receive. See, Jethro is a seasoned believer, and he's like, look, you are going to burn yourself out. You're going to hurt yourself. Now he says, let me give you this wisdom. Verse 19, now obey my voice, Moses. I will give you advice, and God will be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. Moses, you still should preach. You still should go to hospitals. You still should do stuff, Moses, but here's what I want you to do. Let's skip down to verse 21. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And so he's saying, hey, let's break down the responsibilities. Let's get people to lead leaders, and leaders who will lead other leaders, and leaders who will lead other leaders. That way you don't have to do all the work, Moses. And let them judge. Let them go to the hospital. Let them meet the fire marshals on a Tuesday morning. Let them receive phone calls. Let them do certain jobs in the church. Let them do stuff, Moses. Every matter great shall come to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure it. Moses, you will make it past 10 years. If you learn to delegate and let God's people do what God's people are created and meant to do. This is God's idea for church leadership. That it's spread out. It's not about me. It's not about one person. It's about all of us stepping up and leading. So now let's jump into our book, Nehemiah. Our book that we've been reading through and teaching through. In Nehemiah, we see this play out in all of chapter 11 and the first part of chapter 12. Now, in these verses, I want to just talk about the world of Nehemiah and how we see leadership structure even in these passages play out. Because if you are to look and peruse through Nehemiah chapter 11 and the first half of chapter 12, you would contend, Mike, this is so boring. Here's why. It is nothing more than people's names that we can't pronounce. People who we know nothing about. But I would contend with you, saints, it is not boring. I mean, sure, if I'm going to the hospital to pay somebody a visit who's struggling, I'm not going to be like, hey, brother or sister, let me read Nehemiah chapter 11 for you to bring you some comfort. Like, I'm not going to do that and be like, hey, all these names. No, I'll read Romans 8 or a Psalm or something like that. So I'm not saying, like, we could use this in all situations, but what I'm contending is it is not boring, and here's why. Here's why all these names, all through chapter 11 and half of 12, is not boring, is because it reveals the grace of God. It reveals the grace of God, the mercy of God over his people. And you might say, Mike, how? It's a phone book. Like, I wouldn't pick up the phone book and be like, oh, God is gracious. Because really what we're seeing is a census. Like, none of y'all would want to read the Miami-Dade census of all the names of people and ages and backgrounds and stuff like that. That'd be pretty boring. But it's representing the grace of God because in the big picture of God's story, remember, where are they coming from when they're coming back into Jerusalem? They're coming from what's called exile. Meaning that at one point in time, they were taken away from their homeland. And really, the story, it goes like this. God warned his people, don't sin, don't sin, don't sin, don't sin, don't sin, don't do this, don't do this. God's people always do it. We still do it today. And what God says is there are going to be repercussions for your actions. There are going to be repercussions for your sins. There's going to be discipline. Like, the discipline of God is a good thing. I know having 5 teenagers, they challenge the boundaries all the time. Well, why can't we do this? And why can't we do this? And why can't we do this? And it's like, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. And the whole point is to have a healthy life, right? To make sure they're doing the right things, to make sure they're following the Lord. And if discipline comes, that is a good thing. Because if our parents don't discipline us, it's not that they don't love us, but they're setting us up for a terrible life. Because some of the most bratty children are kids who aren't disciplined. And I'm not talking about beating your kids. I'm talking about disciplining them with structure, with rules and regulations and expectations. And for God, he had to discipline his children. And he rose up Babylonians and Assyrians and Chaldeans over time to come into Jerusalem and take his people away into exile, into discipline of God. So now when we read all these people coming back into Jerusalem, we see that it's nothing short of the grace of God to forgive them and bring them back and make them a people and give them a home again. So don't read this and be like, oh man, this is boring. Read this and say, man, the gospel has prevailed. The gospel always wins. The gospel always prevails over our lives. So let's look at some of these people who came back with the mindset of let's see the leadership structure that takes place in Jerusalem. I'm not going to read all this, but I just want to point out some of what's going on. In verse 3, it says that the chiefs of the province were there. So now we just heard Jethro's wisdom to Moses. Break it down. And so what we have is we have the chiefs who are overseeing these provinces. They're being broken down. There's certain leadership structures. We got verse 4, 6, and 7, the sons of Judah, the sons of Perez, the sons of Benjamin. Verse 9, we have an overseer named Joel, who is the administrator. He's the one that's putting in checks and balances. He's the one that's making sure the bills are paid. He's the one that's making sure there's food in Jerusalem. He's the one who is overseeing all the administrative affairs. He's answering the emails, answering the phone. That's who Joel was. Verse 10, we have the priest, the religious component, the leaders who are overseeing the temple. In verse 11, we have Sariah, the son of Hilkiah, who, it says, did the work of the house. In verse 14, we have the mighty men of valor. These are the military men. These are the strong guys who aren't scared to die for a cause. Then you have in verse 16, the chiefs of the Levites. Then you have in verse 17, Mattaniah, which is the worship pastor, the worship leader. This would be Danny back in the day. Verse 19, you got the gatekeepers. These are people who stood by the doors and said, hey, you can't come in here. They're protecting the city. In verse 21, you have the temple servants. In verse 22, you have the overseers of the Levites. The Levites were the priests. They were the gatekeepers. They were some of the worship leaders. But even they had assistants under them. And we're seeing how the advice of Jethro is playing out. Everybody is stepping up and helping. And some of the observations we can make from this list is, number one for me, is that it is a variety of people that God uses for his good. See, in this city, we have all types of people. We have people who are rich. We have people who are poor. We have people who are old. We have people who are young. We have men. We have women. We have judges. We have merchants. We have tax collectors. We have gatekeepers. We have all different types of people who are coming back into the city and helping God rebuild the city and making sure it runs efficiently. Now, what this teaches us is that it takes a lot of people to serve God. It takes all types of people to step up and serve and help to build God's church. Now, in the Old Testament, it's what I would call tribal. In the Old Testament, you had to be of Jewish lineage. That's why we have the sons of Judah and the Levites. These are all people who have a lineage of Judaism in their past. But in the New Testament, it completely switches. Like Jesus breaks down this wall. Jesus has brought us all together as brothers and sisters. This is why Galatians 3 and verse 28 says that there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So he just said there is neither American nor British, there is neither Floridian or Georgian, there is neither man or woman. We are all one in Christ. And what unites us together as a family is Jesus. So there's nothing that could prevent you from stepping up and serving and fitting into the family of God. All of us are so desperately needed. All of you are sitting here with gifts and abilities and talents and treasures and things that you could use to build up the city of God or the church of God in our context. We're all needed. And when we work together, good things happen. 3 weeks ago, we were sitting out front, Tina and I, on the porch having lunch together, and Tina dropped a little piece of chicken on the ground. And when she dropped this piece of chicken on the ground, within 5 minutes, all these ants were swarming around it. And it was amazing to see how all of these ants work together to pick up this chicken and take it back to the den. Let me show you this quick video with Tina's commentary.
Heave ho, everyone work together. Heave ho, get this meat down to our treasury. Heave ho, heave ho.
So what we see happening there is what? They're all working together. Like, we didn't say, hey, where's the senior pastor Ant? He needs to take this piece of meat back into the church so the church can be fed. all these ants, they all came together, and they all worked together to accomplish a goal that one person could not accomplish. And because they worked together, man, they served, and they helped, and they fed, and they were taking care of one another. See, for me, these ants and the Jewish people, not that I'm saying Jewish people are ants, but the two of these situations, it reminds me that, man, they knew what their role was. They knew what the expectation for them was. Again, all of us sit in here with the American expectation that you're not important to God's church as far as leadership is concerned, that you're not needed. But for young men and women in Judaism, they knew, man, there's going to come a time when I'm going to step up and I'm going to serve and I'm going to step into my role. And I am going to serve the Lord with the gifts that He has given to me. All of us, I contend, are leaders. It's not just about me. It's about all of us serving and helping. See, when we get to the New Testament, it's awesome because we see the same train of thought. We see Jesus himself who puts leaders around him with various gifts. We see people like Peter, who was just a bonehead. I mean, he said anything that came to his mind. He was a harsh leader at times. But then we see the contrast. We see someone like John who had just this humble heart and just this loving spirit of shepherding. Then you see people like Philip, who was analytical. He was more of the, hey, how are we going to feed these people? I'm going to try to crunch the numbers and we're going to figure out. He even had people like Judas Iscariot, who was their administrator. He was their treasurer carrying the money bag around. See, the expectation is always that we are going to step up and we are going to serve. So now when we get to a book called Peter, Peter was a guy who served under Jesus. Peter learned these examples from Jesus. And Peter then, he wants to instruct the church. He wants to instruct us. He wants to tell us what he learned from his master, Jesus. And in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, this is amazing what he says to us. He says that you yourselves are like living stones that are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood. To be a holy priesthood. And then if you go down to verse 9, he says, you are a chosen race. He says now, it's no longer that you have to be a chosen country, a chosen Israel. We now make up a chosen race of people. He says, you are a chosen race. For what purpose, Peter? To be a royal priesthood. And even Jesus in Revelation 1, he says that I have created you to be a body of priests, a body of believers. So everybody in here is a priest. Yes, you, everybody in here. So now maybe you're sitting there and thinking, wait, no, I'm not a priest. I don't wear a black suit and wear a little white collar and maybe swing a fog machine and hold up sacraments and come to me to be confessing of sins. Like that's not who I am. That's not the biblical definition of what a priest is. See, Martin Luther's a guy who, during the Great Reformation, he fought against this idea. Because what we did, again, using the term hijacking what it meant to be a priest or a pastor, the church had lifted up one guy as the guy that you would come to have your sins forgiven, that you would come to confess, that you would come to have sacraments done, that you would come to have indulgences performed, and all these things. And Martin Luther, with this quote, he says this to all the people at the time, which caused a great stir. Martin Luther says, let everyone, therefore, who knows himself to be a Christian, be assured of this, that we are all equally priests. That is to say, we have the same power in respect to the word and to the sacraments. We all are created equally under the eyes of Jesus. We all have the same ability to work out and live out our faith and to serve in God's church. He has qualified you. See, we look to me, oh, Mike's got the seminary degrees. That doesn't qualify me. I could have seminary degrees and not be qualified by Jesus. What qualifies us to serve as priests is our belief in Christ. And every single one of us in here is a priest. So now you're saying, well, Mike, if it's not a guy who just wears a black shirt or what little white collar, well, what is it? This would be my definition, what it means for us to all be priests. The priesthood of believers refers to the freedom and responsibility of every Christian to minister the gospel in word and deed to one's neighbor. That's all it means. Every one of you have this responsibility to live sacrificial lives, to make this life not about you, to think about the people around you, to use your gifts, to use your talents, to use your treasures, to use the way God has designed you to serve in his church for his good. And this even includes, at times, as hard as this is, to love our enemies, to love those who we don't want to love. This is what it means to be a priest. Listen, here's confession. Since y'all are my priests, I'm going to confess to y'all. I sinned this week. I sin all the time. Hold on, let me clean this up. You know what I'm saying. But there's one particular sin this week that stands out. Let's put it that way. On Friday, we're kind of beyond it, so I'm not going to call out the guy or anything like this. But on Friday, Tina had something going on where she took one of my kids to a professional place. We'll just call it that. She comes home, and about an hour after she's gone, sitting in my office writing my sermon, and she's visibly upset. She's shaking, she's almost crying, and she goes on and just pretty much tell me this whole story, what happened. And in a nutshell, what happened is some professional man, tall guy, towers over her 2 inches from her face and scolds her over something that she did nothing wrong with. And so I sit there and I receive that for about 10 seconds, and then I casually get up and I walk out my door, and Tina comes and gets me. He's like, Mike, what are you doing? I said, I'm just going down the street real quick. I was angry. I was livid. I was not happy. I wasn't going to go to this place and beat the guy up like I would have 25 years ago. I just wanted to go into the office and be like, listen, you are a professional. Don't you ever talk to my wife that way again. Under no circumstances do I give you that right. And don't ever treat another lady the way you treated my wife. That was it. Gentle. And so I'm sitting there and I'm wrestling with this, but Tina's refusing to let me go because I'm glad, because maybe I would have done something or said something I regretted doing. So I decided to call. Hey, my wife and daughter was just in there. Very disrespectful what you guys did. It's not right. You need to tell the guy what he did was wrong, and it's disrespectful. And then the lady on the phone proceeds to lie after lie after lie, and it just made me more and more and more angry. And I get off the phone, and I'm like, I've got to go in. I have to go in. And so I'm ready to go, and then Michael, my son, he looks at me and says, Dad, vengeance is of the Lord. And I was like, like I literally in that moment released all these burdens. All my anger was gone. And like I cried, and because my son is the one who said, Dad, last week, literally in this pulpit, I said, vengeance of the Lord's. And if you can't allow the Lord to get vengeance, it means you don't believe that he will. And so in that moment, it's like, all right, vengeance is of the Lord. So what does this have to do with this? If we are a priesthood of believers, our call is to love even our enemies. Because we are gospel bearers. This is where I failed. But I have this opportunity. I know how I am. I'm going to be in that place this week with love. I'm going to give them donuts or cookies or something and apologize. They probably won't eat it because they'll think it's poisoned or something. But my intentions are all good. I want to be a priest to them. I want to love them sacrificially, even though, man, they did my wife and my daughter wrong in that situation. See, what we are as priests are what Paul calls us as ambassadors of Christ. We have the news of the gospel. We bring reconciliation. We do this together as a team. We help one another. We serve one another. We love well. And we are a family of God together. It takes all of us. Now, I want to just close with one quick illustration. I'm a guy that loves outer space. Not like geeked out on it where I'm like on chats and watching videos, but I love to sit in my backyard and just look up at the 2 stars in the light polluted sky of Miami and just wonder what's out there and just how far it is and how God created it and how big and grand is God to know the names of all these stars. And I love that. And if you were fortunate to live in the 60s, to see the space race, the promise of getting a man to the moon, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I would have loved to have lived through that. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. What an amazing thing to be a little boy looking up to the moon and thinking that, man, some guy was on that moon. Who was this gentleman on the moon? Yeah, Neil Armstrong, right? First man on the moon. You remember early 60s, Kennedy's like, hey, America will be the first nation on the moon. Some of y'all are in here weirdos and think that we never went. It's all Hollywood. That's okay. We can still love one another. I truly believe we went. But here's the point. When we think of this moon landing, we don't think of everybody else. We don't think of all it took to get Neil to that moon and to get Neil to that position. We don't think of the common people in the room of NASA who pulled this off. See, for me, when I think of Neil, I would think, okay, this is the senior pastor, right? He's the one we think of. But if we put all the work of what NASA had to go through to put Neil on the moon, they would not be standing on the moon. See, God shows us that it takes all of us to efficiently build the city of God like in Nehemiah's time, and it takes all of us to efficiently build God's church in our time. Here's a great quote from NASA about this moon race to get to the moon. What year? Was it 69, right? 69? Anybody remember it? Well, never mind. Well, some of you don't care. All right, some of you remember it, and all right, my parents used to remember it. But here's what NASA says. It says, at its height, NASA estimates that a total of, get this, 400,000 men and women across the United States were involved in the Apollo program. 400,000 ants working together to carry the piece of meat. The number includes everyone from astronauts to mission control to contractors to caterers, engineers, scientists, nurses, doctors, mathematicians, programmers, add in support staff from senior managers to the people selling the coffee, and already there are thousands involved. Multiply that by all the different components of the endeavor, from rockets to space shoots, communications to fuel, design to training, launch to splashdown, and 400,000 seems an almost modest figure. 400,000 people supporting the actions of just one man, Neil Armstrong. I don't know why that says Buzz Aldrin. I think I put that up there. When y'all said Neil Armstrong, I literally thought, wait, wasn't it Buzz? Okay, Neil Armstrong. So one man, Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. One giant step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Did I get that right? One man. But again, how did he pull it off? Everybody involved. How is Nehemiah successfully rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem? Everybody's working together. How is Nehemiah focusing on shifting the pastoral teaching role to Ezra? Because everybody is working together as a people. It takes all hands on deck. So here's where I'm stopping. And some of you are probably sitting here feeling maybe, man, is Mike condemning us? Is Mike being harsh with us that we're not helping? No. The irony is it's the complete opposite. Here's what I want to say to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. We have come a long way together. And you guys have stepped up and helped and served and carried burdens. I mean, we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But what I look out and see is a group of people who have faithfully served and faithfully carried some burdens so that you could free me up and give me a rhythm and free up Danny and Joe and Adam and our staff and other people. So thank you. I want to thank some people. And this is risky because some people in here I might forget, or some people who are watching online I might forget, and you're going to think, oh, Mike doesn't love me. Mike doesn't. I do. Look, I am a man. I have a very weak mind. I can't remember everybody. But I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank my wife, Christina. Because Christina is, man, the godliest of godly women. I'm so blessed to have her as my wife. Without her, I wouldn't be free to be a pastor. She carries my load at home so much. Days when I'm just stressed out. I mean, it happened on Friday. I was so burdened with being behind on some things. And she comes into my office with this plate of food. And it was like sweet potatoes and broccoli and cod and hummus with a little piece of pita. And it was just enough to power me with this fruit drink, this berry fruit smoothie. And she just does stuff like this. She carries the needs of the kids more than me because she knows I need to be free to do what I'm doing. So I thank her personally, but I also thank her that how often do you see her sitting out here? It's very rare, right? Because she's across the hall teaching our young kids. That's her passion. She loves it, but it's ultimately a sacrifice. She would love to sit here and listen to her husband preach. I mean, she'll always go online and listen. I literally, there'll be times she'll be cleaning the room or something, and I walk in, and she has the iPad on playing my sermon. I'm like, oh, no. And I literally just turn around and get out because I hate hearing myself and seeing myself. But she'll listen, but she would love to be out here occasionally, but she's sacrificing. She's one of those little ants carrying the meat. I want to thank people like Shenty and Delaney and Alexa and Monica and Michaela and Mackenzie and people who constantly serve in our nursery when it's needed. That's sacrifice. That's being helpful. I want to thank people like Opal and Johnny and Joe and Miss Shelby. Thank you for your continual and constant Sunday school teaching. Week in, week out, you guys are carrying the piece of meat as one of the helpers around the church. I want to thank Adam and Alana for leading our youth ministry. Again, meat carriers. Maybe we should get those little bracelets. I'm a meat carrier. Only we would know that. You'd be out publicly. What does that mean? Like, that's kind of weird. I want to thank Danny. Danny is our music guy who has just evolved and just done so much to create what he's creating. He's always a work in progress, and he is always doing something around the church. You want to talk about ant. He's a busy ant. Like, he is always doing something. I'll come in and be like, where did this closet come from? Oh, Danny did that. How did this? Oh, Danny did that. And the thing is, Danny will never even tell me. He just does it. Because for Danny, he doesn't want the spotlight. He's just an ant who is serving and working and doing what God has called him to do. I want to thank Alina Valero and David and thank you guys for taking on our welcome team and making that such an awesome area to have fellowship before and after the service. Danny, even counting people in the church at times when I ask you, that's being a little ant and carrying the workload. I want to thank Mercy and Judy Bollinger and Nancy Jacobs for being our greeting team and helping there. I want to thank Kathy Bornott and Michelle. I see it. It doesn't go unnoticed how many times you guys are bringing in stuff for the Mission Cafe, whether it's donuts or pastries or homemade cookies. I want to thank you guys for that. Linda Hill, I want to thank you for just being an encouragement to me. Here's what I love about Linda. Number one, she's here every single week. But number two, I have such a dry, corny humor. She's the only one that gets it. Like, Linda will be sitting there dying laughing every week, every time I say something. Y'all are looking at me with blank faces, and she's sitting there just chuckling away. And I'm like, I love that. I love that. Dwayne and Maybell, man, thank you guys. Dwayne, thank you for being in our parking lot on hot Miami days with a vest on and being the first impressions. Maybe I'll just thank you for your spirit and your heart. Marcus, if he's out here, my son, thank you for little things. He's back there jumping in and running the slides this morning. He's the one that put the lights on and the stage lights. He's a little ant carrying some of the meat. JJ Collins, thank you for all your years of service as a deacon here at Gateway. One of the things I'll never forget about JJ it was my first summer here, 2018. We were cleaning up the upstairs, and we had a cleaning day, and only about maybe 15 people were here, all young, like 30 and younger. I was the oldest guy there, and then JJ shows up. JJ's on the top floor of our building with trash bags in the hot July sun of Miami, dragging these trash bags down the hallway and then down the steps to the dumpster. JJ, that's awesome. Little ant carrying the meat to help around the church. I want to thank Bob Landrian. Bob and Shelley, you guys are amazing people. I just want to thank you, Bob, for just being our chair of the admin and all of his work, man. You guys don't realize the amount of work that Bob Landrian puts in to carry this church and to help this church and to lead this church. And so thank you for that. Bruce, who's not here, and Karen Neff, amazing people. Bruce is our deacon. He is sick as he has been. He's at every meeting, just about. I mean, there's some times when he can't, but for the most part, Bruce is there, still giving wisdom, still helping. I want to thank people like Johnny Barrera, Mercy Godot, and Bill Gehring, and Bruce Neff, and Alina again, and Alana again, and Joe again for being our administrative committee. It's coming together once a month, doing meetings, making hard decisions, being burdened with stuff like that. People like John Reed and Daniel Pena, Alana again, and Delaney again, and Michael again, and Ray, and Alex, and Ashley. Thank you for serving our music team as well. Steve and Sharon Kemp, thank you for being just an encouragement and just being there and helping us and knowing that we got people who we could trust and that we could lean on. Joyce Popham, thank you for just always serving. Joyce is a warrior here. If it's a cleaning day, she's here. If she's needing a nursery, she's here. If she's needed in Sunday school, she's here. She just shows up. She is here. She's a busy ant who is carrying, and she never stops. Guys like Charles Langford, who's not here today, but newer guy. He's coming out on cleaning days. He's doing cleaning stuff. Anna, who's not here, she's running the slides. Her boyfriend, Mikey, he's even helping with doing head counts and stuff like that. I want to thank people like Albert, who's not here, who does a lot of stuff around the church. Rich, thoughtful, encourager. Thank you with gifts and words of encouragement and other people who I'm going to stop listing because I got other people, but I don't want to be the one who's like, oh, I left out somebody, because I'm looking at people now who are encouragements to me, who do so much for this church, like Kathy and Gloria and just all of you guys who help, and Pat, and thank you. And if I missed you, I didn't do it on purpose, I promise you. But all this was to say, thank you. I love you. I know this. We might not have the greatest church in the world. I think it is. But by certain standards, we might not have the best preaching. We might not have the best music. We might not have the best kids ministry. We might not have the best whatever. I think we are. But even if you could sit here and say it's not the best, what we have is so much greater than the best. What we have is, one, Jesus as our cornerstone and as our head, and two, we have a family of beautiful believers here who I know and I've seen love one another deeply, serve one another deeply, help one another deeply. So don't hear this sermon as, oh, Mike is coming down on me, I am not doing enough. I think you were doing just enough. That sounded bad. Not just enough just to get by. You guys are doing enough is what I'm saying. Thank you for helping us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.